Working as a cashier at the local supermarket, you get to know the regulars, exchange small talk with strangers, and sometimes laugh with coworkers during the slow shifts. It was simple work and for the most part uneventful. That's probably why I liked it. Nothing too out of the ordinary ever happened. I never thought I'd dread going into work at a place as ordinary as a supermarket. But after what happened, every shift started to feel like a countdown to the next unsettling encounter. It started like any other day. I just clocked in for the afternoon shift, the sun still shining through the big front windows of the store. It was one of those slow weekdays where the most exciting part of my shift was waiting for the dinner rush. I'd been working at this store for over a year, so I knew the rhythm of the place. Morning regulars came in for their newspapers and coffee, lunch rush brought a crowd, and then things would slow down until people stopped in on their way home from work to pick up last-minute groceries. It was predictable, comforting even. I settled into my usual checkout lane, exchanging pleasantries with customers and scanning items with a mechanical efficiency. Everything was normal until I saw him. He wasn't exactly memorable at first, a man in his late 40s. He came through my line with just a few items: a loaf of bread, a six-pack of beer, and some chips. When he handed me his money, his fingers brushed mine, lingering just a bit too long. It was enough to make me uncomfortable, but I shrugged it off. People are awkward sometimes, no big deal. But then he looked at me, really looked at me with this intensity. His eyes were locked on mine. "Have a nice day," I said, even though the interaction had left me on edge. He didn't say anything, just gave me this weird smile before grabbing his bag and walking away. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. The man came back the next day, and the day after that. At first, I didn't think much of it. We had plenty of regulars, and I figured he was just one of them. But then he started showing up every day, always in my line, even when others were shorter. And always with that same unsettling stare. He didn't say much at first, just handed me his money and walked away. But there was something about the way he looked at me, like he was watching me more closely than he should. His eyes would linger on my face, and sometimes I could feel him watching me even after he'd already left the checkout. My coworkers didn't seem to notice, and I didn't bring it up. I told myself it wasn't a big deal, that maybe I was overreacting. But it was hard to shake the growing unease that crept up every time I saw him walk into the store. Then the comments started. "Your hair looks nice today," he said one afternoon as he handed me his payment. "Thanks," I replied, keeping my tone light even though his comment made me even more uncomfortable. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it, like he was cataloging every detail about me. From then on, every time he came through my line, there was a new comment. "Pretty eyes. Nice smile. You're here every day, aren't you?" His words always hung in the air long after he left, and I started dreading the sound of the door chime every time a customer walked in, afraid it would be him again. It was like this invisible weight pressing down on me every shift, a creeping anxiety that made my skin prickle. When I wasn't working, I tried to push it out of my mind. I spent time with my friends, watched movies, did normal things. But every time I walked into work, that sense of unease returned. It felt like something was building, like the situation was teetering on the edge of something worse. I didn't know what that worse was, but I could feel it coming. One evening, when the store was nearly empty and I was halfway through my shift, he came in again. This time, he didn't grab any groceries. He just walked straight up to my checkout lane, that same weird smile on his face. "Are you single?" he asked. My first instinct was to lie, to say I had a boyfriend, but my throat was too dry to speak. I managed to force a laugh instead, trying to keep things light. "I don't really talk about personal stuff at work," I said, hoping it would end the conversation, but it didn't. He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "What time do you get off work?" The question sent a jolt of fear through me. My mind raced, scrambling for an answer that wouldn't give him what he wanted, but wouldn't antagonize him either. I didn't want to make him angry. I didn't want to escalate the situation. "Late," I mumbled, trying to sound casual. "I work late." He didn't say anything after that, just gave me another one of those smiles, turned, and walked out the door. Was he going to wait for me? Was he planning something? The rest of my shift dragged on in a blur. my eyes constantly flicking toward the front doors, as if expecting to see him waiting for me. Every minute felt like an hour, and by the time my shift ended, I was practically shaking with anxiety. As I clocked out and grabbed my bag from the back room, I tried to convince myself that it would be fine. I'd walk to my car, get home, and everything would be okay. But when I stepped outside, the night air felt too still, too quiet. I spotted him immediately. He was standing near the edge of the parking lot, half hidden behind a row of cars, watching me. I stopped dead in my tracks, frozen with fear. What was he doing? Why was he still here? I panicked, and for a second, I didn't know what to do. My car was only a few rows away, but the thought of walking past him, of getting anywhere near him, was too much for me. I fumbled for my phone and dialed my manager's number. "He's here," I whispered. "The guy, he's still here." Within moments, my manager was outside, his face stern as he marched toward me. "I'll walk you to your car," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I nodded, my legs feeling like jelly as we made our way across the parking lot. The man was still there, his eyes following me the entire time, but he didn't move. He just stood there, watching. When we reached my car, I could finally breathe again. I thanked my manager, climbed inside, locked the doors, and I drove away. I didn't see him again after that. For weeks, I went to work every day, always on edge, always scanning the parking lot, the aisles, the checkout lines, waiting for him to come back, but he never did. Part of me was relieved, part of me was terrified. Because even though he never came back, the memory of the way he stood in the parking lot has never left me. I still feel like he's out there, waiting for the right moment. And that's the worst part. I never thought a simple conversation could end like this. In fact, I've always been the kind of person who enjoys striking up small talk with strangers, whether it's in line at the bank, waiting for coffee, or grocery shopping. I guess I've always thought of myself as friendly, someone who could chat about nothing and not worry about it turning into something sinister. That changed the night I met him. That evening, I was at the local supermarket, picking up a few things for dinner. It wasn't anything special. I needed pasta, tomatoes, some fresh bread, easy stuff. The store was pretty quiet by that time, mostly just a few people browsing the aisles. I had no idea that I wouldn't be able to shake the encounter that would follow me home. The supermarket was one of those mid-sized chains, with aisles that always seemed too narrow. You know the kind, where every footstep echoes a little too loudly. I grabbed a basket and wandered through the produce section, picking out a few tomatoes, a cucumber, and some lettuce. I liked these late-night grocery trips because they were calming, almost meditative. As I made my way toward the bread aisle, I noticed him. An older man, maybe in his early 70s. He had the kind of face that made it hard to guess his age, lined with wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp, too sharp for someone who looked so weathered. I caught his eye as I passed, giving him a polite nod. I grabbed a loaf of sourdough and tossed it into my basket. I wasn't one to overthink things. I continued my shopping, moving to the pasta aisle next. As I stood there debating between two different brands of spaghetti, I heard a soft chuckle behind me. I turned and saw him again. The same man from the bread aisle. He was standing just a few feet away, his cart empty, his eyes fixed on me, and with a frozen smile plastered across his face. "Pasta, huh?" he said, his voice raspy. "Good choice." I forced a polite smile, though my heart had started to race. "Yeah," I replied, "easy dinner." He nodded, that strange smile never faltering, his eyes still locked on mine. It was like he wasn't just making small talk, like he was trying to latch onto something deeper. His gaze felt invasive, like he was looking past my eyes and into my mind, reading every thought I tried to hide. "Do you cook a lot?" he asked, taking a slow step toward me. "Sometimes," I muttered, quickly grabbing the pasta and tossing it into my basket. I didn't want to seem rude, but I was suddenly very aware of how empty the aisle was, how isolated I felt. "Well, I'm sure you're a great cook," he said. "You seem like someone who knows what they're doing." That comment made me pause. There was something about the way he said it, like he knew me, like he'd been watching me for a long time. I looked down at my watch, pretending I was in a hurry, hoping it would give me an excuse to leave. "Well, I should finish up," I said quickly, offering him a strained smile before turning my back to him. I moved to the next aisle, still feeling tense. I told myself I was being silly, that it was just an old man trying to make conversation. But there was something about his presence that set my nerves on edge. I grabbed the rest of the things I needed as quickly as possible, but he was nowhere to be found, and for a brief moment, I let out a sigh of relief. I headed toward the checkout lanes, my basket full and my mind focused on getting home. The store felt emptier than before, the aisles stretching out like long, narrow corridors of silence. As I placed my items on the conveyor belt, I looked around, scanning for any sign of the man. Nothing. Maybe he had left. Maybe I'd overreacted. The cashier rang up my items, and I paid without any more thoughts of the old man. I was just being paranoid, I told myself. The weird feeling in my gut was nothing more than an overactive imagination. But as I walked out into the parking lot, I saw him again. He was standing by the entrance, leaning against the wall, that same frozen smile still on his face. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt my hands clench around the handles of my grocery bags. He didn't say anything, just stood there. I kept my head down and walked toward my car. I could feel his eyes on me the whole way. My car was parked near the far end of the lot, and with every step I took, the parking lot seemed to stretch farther and farther. As I fumbled with my keys, I couldn't help but look back. He was still standing there, still watching, that smile never fading. But now there was something darker in his eyes, something that made my skin crawl. I got into my car, locked the doors, and pulled out of the lot. I didn't want to see him watching me. I didn't want to know if he had moved. As I drove home, the tension in my chest began to ease. When I got home, I locked all the doors, double-checked the windows, and tried to shake off the lingering fear. I told myself I was safe now. He was just some strange man. I would never see him again. But as I sat down on the couch, the groceries still sitting untouched in the kitchen, my phone buzzed. I looked down. It was a text message from an unknown number. "You made it home safely. Good, I knew you would." I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. How did he know? How did he get my number? Before I could react, another message appeared. "I told you, you seem like someone who knows what they're doing." My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I blocked the number, deleted the texts, and tried to calm myself down. But the fear was too strong, too real. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every little noise in the house and the wind outside set my nerves on edge, my mind racing with images of that man and his frozen smile. I never saw him again after that night, but I'll never forget those texts, the ones that made me realize he had been watching me, following me. I still wonder how he got my number. And I still wonder if one day I'll look up in the supermarket and see that frozen smile staring back at me. Because somehow, I know he's not done with me yet. I've always been the kind of person who prefers shopping late at night. I enjoy the quiet, the lack of crowds, and the ability to move through the aisles at my own pace without bumping into anyone. There's something calming about a nearly empty supermarket. But it was during one of those quiet nights that I experienced something I'll never forget. It was a Wednesday, around 10:30 p.m., and I had just realized I was low on groceries. It had been a long day at work, and I wasn't in the mood to cook, but I needed a few things for the rest of the week. I thought I'd pop over to the local supermarket, grab what I needed, and be back home in less than an hour. It was a plan I'd followed countless times before. The store was about 10 minutes from my apartment in one of those quieter parts of town where things close early and the streets empty out by dusk. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed only a handful of cars scattered around, mostly near the front entrance. I liked it that way. Fewer people meant I could get in and out quickly. I parked, grabbed my reusable bags, and made my way inside. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh. The store was quiet, almost eerily so, with only the occasional squeak of a shopping cart breaking the silence. I grabbed a cart and started my usual routine. Produce first, then dairy, meats, and snacks. I always moved through the store the same way. There's something comforting about routines, especially when you're tired. It was the same cart, the same aisles, the same mindless process. But as I turned down the snack aisle, something caught my eye. There was a man leaning against his cart. He was tall, with disheveled clothes and a scruffy beard. his hair sticking out in all directions as though he hadn't bothered to comb it. He was muttering to himself, his lips moving rapidly, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. His eyes were wide, darting around the aisle as if he were looking for something or someone. I hesitated for a moment. There was something off about the way he looked at me, something almost predatory, though I couldn't put my finger on why. I quickly grabbed what I needed and moved to the next aisle, shaking off the strange encounter. People talk to themselves all the time, I told myself. He was probably just eccentric or maybe having a bad day. But as I continued through the store, I couldn't help but look over my shoulder, fearing he might be following me. I made my way to the dairy section, standing in front of the rows of milk and yogurt when I heard it again, that same low muttering. I turned, and when I looked, he was standing at the end of the aisle again, staring at me with that same intense gaze, his lips still moving, though no sound came out this time. The store was almost empty, just me, the man, and a cashier up front who seemed oblivious to everything happening in the aisles. I tried to ignore him, pretending to focus on the expiration dates of the milk in front of me, but I could feel his eyes on me, and that started to worry me. I grabbed the closest carton of milk and hurried to the next aisle. I told myself it was nothing. He was just a weird guy, that's all. But my hands were shaking as I tossed the milk into my cart. I tried to distract myself by checking off the remaining items on my list: bread, lunch meat, eggs. But no matter where I went, I kept seeing him. Every time I turned into a new aisle, he was there, standing at the opposite end, watching me with those wide, unblinking eyes. I didn't know what to do. But the more I moved through the store, the more I realized that he was just following me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked around the store, but there was no one else in sight. The cashier was too far away, probably scrolling through her phone, unaware of what was happening. I felt trapped. I made a beeline for the self-checkout machines, my cart rattling as I moved as fast as I could without breaking into a full-on run. I could feel my skin prickling with anxiety as I scanned my items, my eyes darting around the store, searching for any sign of the man. For a moment, I thought I'd lost him. But as I looked up, there he was, standing just beyond the checkout area, his eyes still locked on me, his mouth moving in that same rapid, silent muttering. I could feel the weight of his gaze pressing down on me. My hands shook as I swiped my card, praying the machine would move faster. I kept looking at him out of the corner of my eye, my stomach twisting in knots. Finally, the machine beeped, signaling that my transaction was complete. I grabbed my bags and bolted for the door. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I felt a brief moment of relief wash over me. The parking lot was empty. I hurried to my car, fumbling with my keys as I tried to unlock the door. But then I heard it, the sound of footsteps. I turned, and there he was, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his eyes still fixed on me. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other, the silence between us heavy and suffocating. I didn't know what he wanted, and I didn't want to find out. I quickly unlocked the door and threw my bags into the passenger seat. I slid into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition, but after a few frantic tries, the engine started. I peeled out of the parking lot, my tires screeching as I sped down the empty road. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The thought of seeing him still standing there watching me was too much. When I finally got home, I sat in my car for a long time, trying to calm myself down. I couldn't shake the image of him, his wide, unblinking eyes, the way he had followed me through the store, his lips moving in that silent muttering. And I had no idea who he was or what he wanted. And now, every time I hear the sound of footsteps behind me, I feel my heart stop for a second. Because you never know when you might run into someone like him. I always saw grocery shopping as just another routine task. It's one of those everyday tasks that we all do on autopilot. Grab a cart, weave through aisles, toss the usual items in, and get out as quickly as possible. Nothing about it ever struck me as dangerous or unsettling. In fact, I kind of enjoyed the mindless routine of it. At least, I used to. Now, every time I step into a store, I get this sinking sensation, like there's something lurking just beyond my line of sight. Because that's where it started, just an ordinary trip to the supermarket. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I had just finished my shift at work. I figured I'd swing by the grocery store on my way home, grab some things for dinner, maybe a bottle of wine to relax with later. The store was one of those big chains, clean, well lit, usually crowded with families. Nothing unusual. I pulled into the parking lot, grabbed a cart from the line outside, and walked in. The cold blast of the AC hit me as I stepped through the automatic doors, and I remember feeling a small sense of relief at the familiar low murmur of shoppers. It felt normal. Safe. I started in the produce section, absent-mindedly tossing apples, some leafy greens, and a bag of baby carrots into my cart. As I reached for a bag of oranges, I noticed someone standing at the far end of the aisle. A man. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, wearing a dark jacket that seemed a little out of place for the warm weather outside. He wasn't looking at the fruit, he was looking at me. I felt a twinge of discomfort, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was just spaced out or thinking about something else. I moved on to the next aisle, mentally checking things off my shopping list as I went. About 10 minutes later, I found myself in the snack aisle, grabbing a bag of chips, when I noticed him again. The same man. He was standing at the end of the aisle, his cart empty, watching me. He wasn't pretending to browse or looking at anything else. He was just there. I thought it was a bit odd, but I tried to ignore it. People cross paths in grocery stores all the time. It's not unusual to see the same person more than once. But something about the way he stood there, motionless, silent, set off alarm bells in my head. I pushed my cart down the aisle, trying not to let my imagination run wild. Maybe he just happened to need something from the same section. Maybe he wasn't paying attention to me at all. But even as I turned the corner into the next aisle, there was an odd vibe in the air that I couldn't ignore. I moved quickly through the store, grabbing the last few things I needed as fast as I could. I wasn't in the mood to linger anymore. The cozy familiarity of the store had started to feel suffocating. I felt like I was being watched. By the time I reached the dairy section, my cart was nearly full and I was ready to check out. That's when I saw him again. He was standing at the far end of the aisle, just staring at me. This time I couldn't brush it off. He wasn't browsing, wasn't shopping. His cart was still empty. I tried to make sense of it, tried to tell myself it was all in my head, but every time I moved, he moved. Every time I turned a corner, he was there. He never got close, just close enough to make his presence known, close enough to make me feel like I couldn't breathe. I felt stupid. This was a public place, full of people. Nothing bad could happen here, right? It's a grocery store. You're safe in a grocery store. I tried to calm myself down, yet whenever I looked around, I noticed him in the distance. His expression never changed, just the same, cold stare. It was the way he looked at me, like I wasn't even a person, just something to watch, something to follow. I looked around at the other shoppers, hoping someone would notice, would see what was happening and step in. But no one paid any attention. They were all lost in their own little worlds, pushing their carts and comparing prices, completely unaware of the growing panic tightening in my chest. I thought about leaving, just abandoning my cart and getting out of there. But a weird sense of pride, or maybe just stubbornness, kept me rooted to the spot. I didn't want to overreact. I made my way to the checkout lanes, my hands shaky as I loaded my items onto the conveyor belt. For the first time in what felt like hours, I didn't see him. The cashier rang up my items and I forced a smile, trying to act normal. My hands were still trembling as I reached for my wallet, fumbling with my credit card. "You all right, ma'am?" the cashier asked. I opened my mouth to say something, to explain what had been happening, but the words wouldn't come. I felt stupid again, embarrassed. What was I supposed to say? Some guy's following me around the store. What if I was wrong? What if it was all in my head? "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied, giving her a tight-lipped smile. As I grabbed my bags and turned to leave, I saw him again. This time he was standing near the entrance, leaning against the wall, just watching. I felt my stomach lurch as nausea washed over me. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned back to the cashier, my voice shaky as I whispered, "Can you get someone? I think that man is following me." Her eyes widened, and she immediately called over a manager. Within minutes, a store employee, big, burly, and with a no-nonsense look on his face, approached me. I pointed toward the man at the entrance, my voice barely a whisper as I explained what had been happening. The employee nodded and made his way over to the man who, upon seeing him approach, quickly turned and walked out of the store. He didn't run, didn't hurry, he just left, like nothing had happened. I stood there, watching as the automatic doors slid shut behind him. I didn't feel any relief, though. The whole thing left me cold, like something was unfinished. I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd be waiting outside, lingering in the parking lot, or that I'd see him again somewhere else. The store employee came back a few minutes later, his face serious but calm. "He's gone," he said. "I watched him drive off. Do you need someone to walk you to your car?" I nodded, grateful, but still shaken. As we made our way across the lot, I kept looking around, expecting the man to appear again, to be hiding behind one of the cars or standing in the shadows waiting for me. But he wasn't there. I drove home that night, every muscle in my body tense. I couldn't stop checking my rearview mirror, convinced that I'd see his car trailing behind me, following me home. But there was nothing. No one. I never saw him again, but the memory of that day still haunts me. I think about it every time I walk into a store, every time I feel a pair of eyes on me when I'm in public. Maybe he was just some creep looking to make someone uncomfortable, or maybe it was something worse. I'll never know. To this day, the mundane task of grocery shopping feels loaded with tension. I don't linger in the aisles anymore. I don't wander the store casually like I used to. I move quickly, keeping my head down, my eyes scanning for anything or anyone that feels off. Because I've learned that even in the most ordinary places, you're never really safe. If these stories had you double-checking over your shoulder in the store, hit the like button and subscribe for more creepy tales that'll make even the most ordinary moments feel terrifying. Got your own eerie supermarket encounter? Drop it in the comments. We want to hear all the chilling details. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss a new video. Stay safe out there, and remember, trust your instincts when something feels off. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.